The ranch house was alive with the faint hum of cicadas outside, though inside all was quiet. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, turning the polished wood floors into golden mirrors. The scent of leather and hay seemed to hang permanently in the air, mingling with the faint smoke from the hearth. Jackson Hartley, the richest cowboy for miles, stretched his long frame across the worn but expensive couch, boots crossed, hat tilted over his eyes. His broad chest rose and fell with slow, practiced breaths, and to anyone passing by, he was sound asleep. But Jackson wasn't sleeping. His mind was sharp, waiting. He had decided that morning to test a suspicion, one that had tickled at the back of his thoughts for weeks. Clara, the shy maid who worked silently around the ranch, had a way of watching him when she thought no one else was looking. She never spoke more than necessary, never lingered when he entered a room, but her eyes betrayed her. They followed him, quick as a sparrow's wings, and then darted away the moment his gaze threatened to meet hers. Jackson, amused and intrigued, wanted to know just how deep that quiet affection ran. So here he was, pretending to nap, his breathing slowed, his body loose and still. He could hear the faint shuffle of steps from the kitchen, the careful rhythm of someone who had taught herself to move quietly so as not to be noticed. Clara. She entered with a tray in her hands, balanced carefully against her hip, her dark braids swaying against her plain cotton dress. She walked lightly across the rug, setting the tray down on the table with care. She dusted the surface, adjusted the vase of wildflowers, and wiped her hands neatly against her apron. For a moment she kept her head down, focused only on her tasks, but gradually her gaze betrayed her. She glanced toward the couch. Jackson's chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, his lips parted slightly, the brim of his hat shading most of his face. Clara froze, standing perfectly still, her hands fidgeting nervously at her waist. She bit her lower lip, her brow furrowing as if she debated with herself. Then, with hesitant steps, she moved closer to him. She stopped near the edge of the couch, her fingers twisting in her apron strings. For a long moment she only looked at him, her eyes softening as though she saw something in him no one else ever bothered to notice. Slowly, as if drawn by a force she couldn't fight, she reached out and hovered her hand over his boot. Her fingertips quivered in the air, longing to brush against the leather, but she pulled back at the last second, breathing unevenly. Her eyes lifted to his face, partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat. A small, tender smile ghosted across her lips. Then she whispered, so faintly Jackson almost doubted his ears, "You don't even know what you do to me." Jackson's heart pounded against his ribs. He had expected perhaps a lingering glance, maybe a sigh, but not words, raw, vulnerable words spoken into the quiet room. He forced himself utterly still, not daring to ruin the fragile moment. Clara's cheeks flushed as though she realized she had said too much. She glanced toward the door, half ready to flee, but instead she leaned closer. Her slender fingers reached for the brim of his hat, adjusting it gently so it sat more securely on his head. The gesture was intimate, careful, filled with a care she probably didn't even realize she was showing. For an instant her hand lingered just above his temple, trembling as though she longed to let it rest there, to feel the warmth of his skin. She drew back quickly, pressing her palm against her chest as if to steady her racing heartbeat. Her breath came out in a shaky sigh, her shoulders slumping under the weight of feelings she kept hidden every day. "You're a fool, Clara," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. "He'd never look at you that way." With that, she turned, gathering her things and retreating toward the door. The room felt suddenly emptier for her absence, as if she had carried the air of it away with her. Jackson remained frozen on the couch, though now not from pretense. He had set out to test a suspicion, to prove to himself that the shy maid harbored a quiet affection for him. But what he had heard and seen cut deeper than he had imagined. Clara's words weren't the shallow admiration of a servant for her master, they were filled with longing, quiet pain, and truth. The weight of it settled heavy in his chest, mixed with something he hadn't felt in years, surprise. He had always thought of her as a shadow, quiet and efficient, a presence that slipped unnoticed from room to room. But now she seemed anything but invisible. Her trembling courage, her whispered confession, the gentleness in the way she touched his hat, all of it burned itself into his memory. For the first time in a long while, the unshakable cowboy felt unsteady. Jackson Hartley, who could command a herd with a shout, who had built his fortune with grit and steel, found himself shaken by the soft, secret love of a shy maid. And as he lay there, staring at the ceiling through lowered lashes, one thought anchored itself in his mind: Clara wasn't invisible anymore. She never would be again. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. The ranch had quieted to the sounds of evening, horses shifting in their stalls, the creak of the windmill turning lazily in the breeze, and the faint rustle of leaves. Lanterns glowed softly around the stables, casting pools of golden light against the wooden beams. Clara moved among them quietly, her basket of linens pressed close to her side as she hung freshly washed cloths over a line stretched near the tack room. She hummed softly, though her voice trembled. The memory of what she had whispered earlier that day haunted her, replaying over and over until her cheeks burned. She had let her guard slip. She had spoken her heart to a man who could never feel the same. At least, she believed he hadn't heard. She lifted a sheet onto the line, smoothing its edges with trembling hands. A sound behind her, a deliberate crunch of boots against gravel, made her jump. She turned sharply, the lantern's glow spilling across the tall figure leaning against the fence post. Jackson hardly stood there, hat pushed back, arms folded across his broad chest. His gaze was fixed on her, steady and unreadable. "Evenin', Clara," he said, voice low and smooth. Her breath caught. She turned back to her work, fumbling with the clothespin. "Evenin', Mr. Hartley. You always this shy?" he asked after a pause, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Or is it just when I'm around?" Her fingers slipped, and the clothespin fell into the dirt. She bent to grab it quickly, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she murmured, keeping her eyes on the sheet. Jackson pushed off the fence and walked closer, his boots slow against the packed earth. When he stopped just a few feet from her, Clara felt the air tighten around them. "I been wonderin'," he said carefully, his voice quieter now, "what's going through your head when you think I'm asleep?" Her entire body froze. The sheet fluttered in her grasp, forgotten. Slowly, as if afraid to believe what she had heard, she turned toward him. Her eyes widened, horror dawning across her face. "Why you were awake." He tipped his head slightly, the corners of his lips curving into the faintest smile. "Sure was. Heard every word." The basket of linens nearly slipped from her hands. "Please, Mr. Hartley," she stammered, voice breaking, "I didn't mean." "Didn't mean what?" His words cut in gently, not sharp, not mocking, simply firm. He took another step forward, and Clara's back brushed the hanging sheets. Lantern light flickered across his face, outlining the strength in his jaw, the seriousness in his eyes. "Didn't mean to tell the truth." Clara's throat worked as she swallowed, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. I was foolish. I shouldn't have said such things. I know my place." Jackson reached out then, not roughly, but with a careful certainty. His hand tilted her chin up, forcing her eyes to meet his. She trembled under his touch, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "You think I'd never look at you that way?" His voice had changed now, low, raw, carrying an edge of vulnerability he rarely let anyone hear. Her breath shook as it left her. "Why would you? You could have any woman you wanted. You're just the only one I can't stop thinking about." The words fell from his lips like a confession long held back, and Clara blinked, startled. "You got it in your head that I don't see you, Clara, but I do. More than you realize." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His thumb brushed lightly against her cheek, sending a wave of warmth through her. He leaned closer, the brim of his hat nearly touching hers. "When you thought I was sleepin'," he whispered, "and you fixed my hat, whispered what was in your heart, I swear, it near knocked the breath out of me." Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. The courage she had found earlier in secret seemed impossible now, with his eyes locked on hers. "I ain't a man who gets surprised often," Jackson went on, his tone softer now, almost tender. "But you did. You surprised me, Clara. And I can't forget it." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly tried to turn her face away, but he caught it with his thumb, brushing it away gently. "Don't cry," he murmured. "You got nothing to be ashamed of." The sheets swayed around them as the night breeze stirred, cocooning them in a fragile, private world. Clara's voice finally broke through the lump in her throat. "I don't want to hope for something that isn't real." Jackson's hand slid to the back of her neck, steady and warm. "It's real," he said firmly. "As real as the ground we're standing on." Her eyes searched his, desperate for certainty, and what she found there unraveled every wall she had built around her heart. Slowly, tentatively, she let her body lean toward his, her trembling lessening as his presence steadied her. Under the lantern glow, with the smell of hay and leather thick in the night air, Jackson lowered his forehead to hers, his breath mingling with hers in the quiet. He didn't rush, didn't demand, only waited until she no longer pulled back. Then, gently, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that spoke of promises, not possession, of tender discovery, not conquest. When they parted, Clara's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with wonder. Jackson smiled faintly, his hand still cradling her face. "Now you know," he whispered, "I look at you that way. And I ain't stoppin'." The shy maid who had once thought herself invisible felt, for the first time, fully seen. And the rich cowboy who thought nothing could surprise him found himself caught in the sweetest surprise of all.